from the festivals. This is our second event here at Malvern Books, and we really appreciate the wonderful staff to give us this great venue and help us with the publicity and the refreshments. It's a lovely place to be talking about lesbian fiction. On behalf of the Sapphic Reading Group here in Austin, I'd like to welcome all of you. If you're interested in a lively conversation about our fiction, the Sapphic Reading Group meets on the second Friday of every month at the Genuine Joe Coffee House. We meet from 7:30 to about 9, and we usually have a couple of book selections that we talk about. Our group is an open group. You're welcome to come, visit, stay a while, and come back. There's a little tiny flyer over there on the table that gives you our Facebook page and our website and a little information. We will be meeting in December, the second Friday in December, and then we'll be putting out a schedule on Facebook for the next year, which is almost here. Couple of pieces of information here. Malvern has a sign-up sheet if you want to get on their email list. The way you get on our email list and the way you win free books is to fill out one of those registration cards over there. And at the conclusion of the program, I will be giving away some really cool books that two of our publishers have donated. One is Radcliffe of Bold Strokes Books, and our other one is Erin O'Reilly of Affinity Rainbow Publications. Ooh. So, okay. The other bit of news I'd like to share with you is that both of our authors, Barbara Ann Wright and Jaycie Morrison, have stories in the Lone Star collection. The reading group put this book together as a fundraiser for our annual festivals, and it was published at no cost to us, and all the proceeds go toward future events here. And Erin rode ramrod on that and did the formatting and artwork and goodness knows what else. But and we appreciate that, and we have a couple of copies on hand if you would like to get those. Okay, and both Barbara and Jaycie have stories in the collection. Okay.
Where are those available? I didn't see them.
They're, yeah.
Okay.
This is what it looks like.
Okay.
It's all stories that have some sort of Texas theme, from romance to adventure to sci-fi to fantasy. It's a varied collection. Okay, and without any further ado, let's get down to why you came here. Jaycie Morrison is our first author today. She is from Dallas, but she leaves Texas during the summer to hang out in Colorado. I haven't gotten any details yet about what she does up in Colorado, whether it's not rock hunting or whatever. Her first novel was published in 2016. It was called Basic Training of the Heart, which has been followed by Heart's Orders, and I understand that she's working on another book in a sequence, and you can ask her some questions about that. Her short story in the Lone Star collection is Whether or Not. So, Jaycie.
Thank you, Yvette. It's always nice to be in Austin. I was telling her I lived here from the time I was 2 until the time I was 9. And so my memories of this town are sort of from a child's perspective, like, oh, look for the big Peter Pan, or we'll have hamburgers at this place where there are birds. I don't think any of those things are here anymore, but it was a great place to grow up and enjoyed it. I'm going to read from Heart's Orders, my second novel. and it's available here and now. The place that this takes place is the Women's Army Corps camp in Fort Des Moines, Iowa, and the date is September 10th, 1944. The way it was now with Helen Tucker had happened so gradually that T wasn't sure how to explain it. Not like she would even try to anyone ever, because what scared her most was how right it felt, like natural almost. But of course it wasn't. It was wrong and evil and sinful as anything. You couldn't live your whole life as a good Baptist girl and not know that. Now Helen didn't care what the Bible said. T remembered how shocked she'd been when Helen declared that she wasn't a believer, that she'd never given her life to Jesus or hardly even been in a church at all. But even knowing that, T had secretly found Helen's wild ways sort of exciting. No one like that had ever wanted to be her friend before, and T had been proud that Helen had saved her the next bunk over when they first got to the barracks, and almost always sat by her in the mess hall and in classes. When the gradual thing first started happening, T had thought it was just part of becoming someone's best friend. Lots of girls held hands at some time, didn't they? And when they both passed their first test, there had been a long, tight hug of celebration that made her feel just wonderful. She hadn't thought there was anything unusual about that either. On their very first day in camp, even before they got settled in and started learning about being soldiers, their drill instructor, Sergeant Raines, had told them they would become like a family. But none of the other girls had seemed anything like her sisters, and she'd been feeling mighty homesick that first evening until her new friend Helen had struck up a conversation. They seemed to have a lot in common, and pretty soon she and Helen were talking over any and everything, Helen waiting with surprising patience as T stammered over her words like she did. She had pretty much decided she was going to enjoy being a soldier, in spite of what some of the folks back home said about women being in the service. But after 4 days in her new life as Private Teresa Owens, T started worrying that they were going to tell her to go home. She was afraid that her bad grades they took in those classes meant she was too stupid to stay in the WAC. This was one more thing that she and Helen shared. Oh, sure, Helen blustered that she hadn't thought joining the Army meant going back to dang school, but T knew she was nervous too. Luckily, instead of throwing them out, Sergeant Raines had assigned Bet Smythe, a smart college girl who was their squad leader, to help her and Helen with their studies. Bet was very patient, and she made the training sessions seem reasonable, like directions for baking a cake or sewing on a button. Once T began to catch on a little better and was able to stop feeling so anxious all the time, she began to notice that Helen always brushed her teeth or put on a clean shirt or made sure to comb her hair back out of her eyes when it was time for them to meet with Bet for tutoring. T started wondering if Helen would rather have Bet as her best friend, and it gave her an awful ache inside. Bet was beautiful and smart, whereas T was slow in lots of ways, and nothing special to look at. She'd been told both of those things plenty of times. Once that thought about Helen and Bet got settled in her head, she got a lump in her throat that made it even harder to talk, so she didn't. Then Helen pulled her aside one night as they were walking back from dinner. "What's the matter with you?" she demanded impatiently. She just shook her head and looked down. She didn't like it when Helen got mad. It made her think of her daddy and the way he'd yell when it hadn't rained enough, or it rained too much, or there was too much wind to plant, or the mule went lame, or any one of 3 dozen other things that would upset him. When T didn't answer, Helen put her hand on T's cheek, very carefully raising her face. Her voice changed to match the tone. The anger was completely absent, and only sweetness remained. "Please, T, I hate it when you're unhappy. You gotta let me know what I did so I can try to fix it." The thought of explaining it all in words was exhausting, so she simply stammered out Bet's name. Helen stood up, her fists clenched. "What about her? Was she mean? Did Bet say something that upset you?" T put her hand on Helen's arm to pull her back down. "No, she's just so pretty." Her head lowered again and her voice was softer. "I know you like her better than me." Helen's mouth opened a little and she sat back down, as if she was surprised. "Look, T, Bet's a doll, all right? And yeah, maybe I put on the dog for her a little bit, okay? But it don't mean nothing." She took T's hand again. "You were brave to tell me that, so I'm gonna be brave too. I'm gonna tell you something you might not like to hear, but I'm gonna hope that maybe, just maybe, it'll be all right." T wanted to close her eyes like her mama did when her daddy was telling them bad news. But then Helen had taken her other hand too, and that made the moment suddenly feel too important not to watch. You're not only my best friend, T, Helen took in a long breath. You're the person I most want to see, the one I most want to be with. You're special to me. She let the rest of her breath out. I have those kinds of feelings for you. Is that all right? At the time, T had thought she might cry. Helen didn't seem the type to say such nice things to someone. And here, she'd said it to plain, stuttering Teresa Owens from Haskett, Oklahoma. Helen was looking at her really hard, like she was trying to see what T was thinking. Please say something, T. T swallowed, trying to choke back the stream of emotions. Relief, excitement, joy. Helen still likes me best. She put her hands on Helen's face, the way her mama did when she was trying to soothe her hurt. Okay, was all she could manage. But Helen smiled, let her know it was enough. I didn't know if anybody had a question or we could wait till later.
No, I was just gonna wonder, when you write your stories, do you go from that line or do you just let it flow?
No, I'm a total pantser. As in by the seat of your pants. It just kind of comes as it comes. And sometimes I'm surprised by characters who show up or characters who leave or...
So they run the story?
Yeah, they pretty much do.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes I try to whip them to the line, but it doesn't always work.
No, it doesn't. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
As a 20-year Army veteran, I'm curious if you have any background in the military.
I did not serve myself, but my dad was in the Army and then in the reserves. And so, of course, I had the experience of seeing him getting in his uniform and going to the reserves every month and doing that. But I did a lot of research. I went to Fort Des Moines, actually flew there to Iowa and went to the base, or what's left of it. There's a small, very underfunded museum, but really nice people run it, and I got to talk to them and just kind of feel it, you know, because it was really important to me to get it right. But for you all who have served, and for those in the past, because the
Well, I
women...
served in the regular Army, so it's interesting for me to hear about the Women's Army Corps.
Yes.
And the myriad of characters that you have developed, you know, from all walks of life is so true to the regular Army as well.
Right, and I think that was one of the amazing things. I mean, as horrible as World War II was with all the destruction and loss of life, but as socially, so many people got to come together who wouldn't have otherwise. You know, we're so way back, no social media, no way of communicating with people in other towns, no way of finding other people. So it was really a kind of an equalizing experience, I think, for these women, and very empowering. You know, at the time, they weren't going to let women do a lot of things at first, because, like, being anything that was classified, because they thought women couldn't keep secrets. I think we know women keep more secrets than anybody, but yeah. So it was an interesting thing to look into and to read some of the anecdotes that are out there and look into the research. But yeah, I really wanted to get it right. And I've heard from a lot of veterans and people who say, well, that's not the Army I was in. They were really wanting women to be ladies first and soldiers second, because there was all this smear campaign about women being in the service, and so it was really important that they not lose their femininity or their love for home and family and children and husbands. And, you know, of course, most of them didn't, but there were a few who went, wow, I'm not the only one out here who feels a little differently about women.
Times have changed.
Times have changed, yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, we read the first book. This one was from the second book.
That's right.
And do you have some of the same characters and then some new characters?
Yeah, mostly, they're mostly the ones who were in the first book, but they're like Helen and T were in the first book, but you just didn't really get to know them very well.
Oh, okay.
So they're more featured in this book, and then original characters also continue.
And then the third, you said you're working on the third book, and
yes.
it'll have same characters.
Right.
And new, yeah.
And new emphasis on different ones, so yeah. I hope you like them, because they're kind of going to stick around a little bit.
What got you writing in the first place?
This particular story really, sounds so weird to say, but it really came to me in a dream. I think I had spent some time the night before I was looking into something else on the internet, and, you go down this little rabbit hole, click this, then you click that, then you click the other. And somehow I did end up looking at something that had the Women's Army Corps in it, referenced it, and that night I had a really intense dream. And I thought, I need to write some of this down, and it just started. And kept going, and kept going, and kept going. About 2 years later, my friends are saying, you say you're writing, but we've never seen anything. So I thought, well, maybe I should figure out if this is actually worth reading, so I gave it to a couple of people to beta read for me, and they said, yeah, you need to turn this in.
Scary experience.
It is.
Turn loose if you're riding. for
Very
example.
scary, very scary. And as excited as I was, I'm with Bold Strokes Books, so as excited as I was when I got the contract, about 10 minutes after the woohoo part, I thought, wait a minute, this means people I don't know are going to read it. Yeah, but it's been a really great experience. So, yeah. And thank you all so much for being here. It's great to talk about it and be around people who like to read. Uh-huh.
I have a kind of question. When you started kind of showing your writing to other people, did you ever take, I took some creative writing classes some time ago in a college,
Uh-huh.
made a big mistake because they were basically trying to mold literary authors, and so you had the list of thou shalt nots.
Oh, yes.
Like you couldn't write anything fun, no science fiction, no romance.
Oh, no.
Right, and all this, and so I've just sort of been shy about letting anybody even touch my writing because, so I guess my question is, how did you find people that you felt that you could trust to read your writing that were gonna read it without, give you positive feedback without trying to mold you into something other than what you wanted to be?
Well, first I picked my friends.
Okay, yeah.
Seriously, one of my friends is very linear, which I'm really not. So I got her to read it to make sure, and she caught a couple of things where I said 3 days later, but it was actually a week and a half, and so a couple of things that were sort of out of sync, and she caught those things. And then the second person I gave it to was actually Air Force, but former military, and she caught a couple of things that were not quite right. I think I promoted a sergeant to a corporal. Apparently that's not the way it goes. So yeah. So she caught those things, and but both of them were so positive and so encouraging, and so that really helped. And after that point, I was a little more willing to send it farther afield and hope for the best.
Did you ever
Yeah.
hire a beta reader?
I haven't ever hired one. I had a good friend of mine, Barbara Wright, you may have heard of her, look over the third book before I submitted it, because there were some things about it I wasn't real happy with, and she made some suggestions, and I went back. So she's the closest to a pro who I've ever given it to. But I do have an editor with Bold Strokes, and she makes lots of suggestions. No, suggestions is not the right word. She tells me lots of things to do, and some of them I do, and most of them I do.
How'd you happen to go with Bold Strokes?
One of my friends who had read the book was a huge fan of several of the Bold Strokes authors, and she said their books are the ones that have the fewest errors or no errors almost across the board of books that she had read. And it just so happened that the Romantic Times people were in town in Dallas that weekend, and they had a meet the publisher moment. I thought it was meet, like, hi, how are you? Apparently we were supposed to do a pitch.
Oh.
And I was waiting to go in, and somebody else was standing around going, we're going to do a great pitch. And I thought, pitch? No pitch. I could barely complete a sentence at that moment. So I sat down, and Radcliffe and Sandy Lowe were at the table, and I started with some brilliant comment like, so I wrote this book? And they said, kind of pulled it, but we got going, and they said, yeah, we'd like to read it, and so that was the only place I submitted it. When they took it, that was it.